So we're going to go to Jerusalem and we're going to look at some spectacular sites there in the Old City with Rose, who's a director at the Tower of David Museum. And we're really excited to bring this to you. So enjoy. We are right now right by what's referred to as the Jaffa Gate, which is pretty much, I think, the main entrance into the Old City of Jerusalem, the walled city of Jerusalem. And you start to build, because it gets confusing as far as the sequence of these different periods of time, all of which center around this city. So if you were to do sort of the abbreviated cliff notes of the periods in Jerusalem, how would they lay out? How would you tell our audience how these periods lay out?
Well, it's like you said, if you come to this museum, we always say that our museum is either a wonderful opening to the city of Jerusalem or kind of a luscious dessert, because it does put everything into perspective. So the way I think about the history of Jerusalem is really as I take a path in my mind through the rooms of the museum. And just very quickly, Jerusalem, of course, was a Canaanite city that King David came and conquered and established his city here, much like Washington D.C. was established, because it was the only city that didn't belong to one of the colonies who became states. Right. The same thing with Jerusalem. It didn't belong to anybody, and he said, this will be the capital of my 12 tribes. So King David conquered the city and began what we call the First Temple period. The temple was, of course, built by his son Solomon, because David was a man of war, and of course Solomon was a man of peace. It continued on to when the Jews were exiled in 586 BCE, when the temple was destroyed. The first temple was destroyed. The Jews were exiled to Babylon, but were allowed to come back by a decree of King Cyrus. And then began what we call the Second Temple period, again at 7th century BCE. Came the Second Temple period, which was, of course, where we have most of the really monumental and very important findings from this period. That's the end of the Second Temple period was the time of King Herod. Of course, built the tower, but we have the foundations of his palace. And then time goes on. As I said, in 70, the Roman Empire destroyed Jerusalem. The Jews were exiled for 2,000 years. The Roman Empire became the rulers of this territory. They changed the name of Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina. And in about the 4th century, with King Constantine, the Roman Empire became Christian. It became the Byzantine Christian Empire, and Jerusalem became a purely Christian city.
Now, referencing the life of Jesus, so he would have come right after Herod, right?
Exactly.
So we're in the Second Temple period. Herod builds this beautiful temple here, and Jesus. Now Herod dies, and I think it was shortly after that when Jesus was here. He's crucified here. And now it's 400 years. So, and is it an irony also that it's the Romans that basically killed everybody, dismantled this place, and then 400 years later they come back to install Christianity?
Yeah, that I think that there's a real ironic sense of poetic justice to it. Yet Jesus lived in Jerusalem at the very end of the Second Temple period, and as we know, he had a prophecy also of crying because he sees the destruction of Jerusalem, which happened just a few years after the crucifixion. And
that happened if we're up on that little perch over here at the Mount Olives, where he looked across, right? So you can literally
you can see if you go up to the tower that Herod built, and you look across, and we have this magnificent view of the old city of Jerusalem. Yes, you can see Paternoster, the church, where on the Mount of Olives, where Jesus foretold what would be the destruction of Jerusalem.
Right.
I think it was probably a very tumultuous time during the time of Jesus, and as you said, the Romans crucified Jesus, put an end to both Judaism and Christianity in Jerusalem, and yet, after a few hundred years, but still, King Constantine converts to Christianity and makes his entire empire, including the city of Jerusalem, Christian once again.
Wow.
And so it is a long time coming.
And then after Constantine, what was the next period?
Then we have a new religion coming up in the Middle East, and that's the religion of Islam. And Muhammad, who's the prophet of Islam, sent his troops, his warriors across the Middle East, and Jerusalem also was conquered as part of the Islamic invasion, and so Jerusalem then became an Islamic city.
And that was roughly
638.
638,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. So after about 350 years, Jerusalem becomes a Muslim city, and this lasts, and this of course becomes a time when many of the iconic Muslim buildings are built here, including the Dome of the Rock, which was built on top of the temple that had been demolished completely by the Romans.
Right.
So it stayed a Muslim city until 1099. 1099, the Crusaders come. There was a call for a crusade throughout Europe to take the Holy Land back for Christendom. So the Crusaders then came, and once again, Jerusalem became a Christian city. And you can see we have evidence of things like that. The Dome of the Rock became a church. So things, change hands, as time goes by, because it was no longer an Islamic city.
Right, but they didn't destroy all the buildings. They just
they
used the buildings for their own
yes,
purposes.
Yes,
yeah.
they just changed it.
Yeah.
And it stayed a Christian city until there was the famous Battle of Kfar Hittim, of the Horns of Hittim, where the Muslims once again took over the city. And then there were a variety of Muslim rulers from the Mamluks who came out of Egypt, and then eventually became Ottoman in 1517. It was a very large empire, kind of equal to the European empires, but it was an empire here in the Middle East. It was managed from Constantinople, which is today Turkey, Ankara, Turkey. It was the Middle Eastern Empire. It encompassed a huge amount of territory, and yes, it was Muslim, although they were Turks rather than Arabs. But it was a Muslim empire, and that lasted for 300 years here in Jerusalem.
And did they expand the walls of the city during that period?
Yes, that was Suleiman the Magnificent. So what had happened is that as these different rulers came to Jerusalem, this site was always occupied and was always built. And if you look at the topography of Jerusalem, you can understand why. Because Jerusalem is protected by all sides by valleys, except here. And in the Bible it even says, watch out, evil comes from the north. Well, it could come from here because it's a very flat surface. So armies could have come in, all through history, could have come in and gone right into the city. So there was a citadel here, even from before the days of Herod. In fact, we have a wall here. There's a wall down there from the time of the Hasmoneans, Judah Maccabee. It's hundreds of years before Herod. But what happened was that each one built onto this citadel. So the citadel itself is not from one period. It's from many, many, many periods. And Sultan Suleiman, when he came in, Suleiman the Magnificent, he said, Jerusalem is kind of neglected. So let's rebuild the walls, which he built all the walls around the old city, and let's rebuild this citadel. And you'll find some of the really landmark parts of the citadel here were built by Sultan Suleiman.
Wow.
And it's stayed since then.
And then what happened next?
And then we get into the 20th century, 1917. There's a war, the Great War, the war to end all wars, the First World War. It happened here as well in the Middle East. And the British, led by General Allenby, entered the city in 1917, took the city, and made Jerusalem British, part of the British Mandate. In fact, this is exactly 100 years. This December 11th will be 100 years since Jerusalem became a British city and the British Mandate was instituted here. And here at the museum, we're going to be celebrating and commemorating that fact with a actual reconstruction of General Allenby coming through the gates of the city. And it was also interesting, it was around Christmas time that he came. And he telegraphed to his superiors in London that he's bringing a Christmas present to the world, which is Jerusalem of peace. And when he walked into the city, he had remembered that in 1898, the German Kaiser had come into Jerusalem on a royal state visit in a horse and carriage and as a conqueror. And he comes through on his horse, dismounts his horse, and says, I come to Jerusalem not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim. And he came to the steps of the Tower of David, and there was a big ceremony where he said that what the British were going to do was to give freedom of worship to all the inhabitants. we are going to be recreating that with descendants of General Allenby,
Oh, wow.
Lady Allenby and her son, and they will be here on December 11th, and it will be the opening of a big exhibition about that.
Wow.
So we were British until 1948.
Wow. And then 1948 happens.
And then 1948 was the War of Independence of the State of Israel. And at that time, there's a very complicated history, isn't
Yes.
it? At that time, what happened is that when the war ended, Jerusalem was divided. Because there was fighting inside the city, all the Arab nations who surrounded Israel joined the attack after Israel proclaimed its independence. On the 14th of May, 1948, all the surrounding Arab armies attacked. That was Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and the local Palestinian population also rose up. So the country was under attack. Even though the borders were expanded from what the original, what had been originally allotted, Jerusalem was left divided. And Jerusalem was a divided city from 1948 until 1967. Where we are now was Jordan. And in fact, it was a garrison for soldiers. The way this citadel has been for 3,000 years, a garrison for soldiers. You could even talk to people who lived right across the way in Jewish Jerusalem, kind of on the slopes, and they would look and they could see the soldiers garrisoned along the walls, and some would take pot shots, and it was a threatening atmosphere. What we're proud to say is that after 1967, this place, which had been a garrison for troops, for war, basically, for 3,000 years, became a place of peace. And when Teddy Kollek, who is the legendary mayor of Jerusalem, the mayor who presided over bringing the two sides of the city together, when he saw this place, he said, this is a place that has to be a museum. This is a place that has to be a place of peace. This is a place that will bring people together. It will no longer keep them apart. It will bring them together. And that's really the legacy that we try and keep on going through the years.
That's it for this particular interview. Thanks for joining me. Really excited to take this ongoing journey with you as we keep bringing more content. If you haven't already, you really should subscribe to this channel. There's a lot of phenomenal content coming down the road into the future that you'll want to know about. Leave a comment down here. I think people would love to hear from you, and then you can hear from them too. If you liked it, go ahead and give a like. It only takes half a second, and share this with people that you care about. The world needs more light in it right now. So thanks for being with me. Hope to connect with you again soon.